Overlooking the current landscape of Yu-Gi-Oh!, finding a place for Dark Magician to be positioned within the metagame is incredibly difficult. Every deck in the game right now that is seeing success at a high level just outpaces Dark Magician on every aspect of the playing field, whether it's through its grind game recursiveness, the layered interactions these other decks can generate, and the interactions that Dark Magician just can't play through. Every version of Dark Magician just seems to struggle and doesn't really have a place in the game right now, whether it's Fiendsmith Dark Magician, Primite Dark Magician. Even players have begun to experiment with Mitsurugi Dark Magician as a way to cope with the current metagame, given that how both of these engines don't really contradict with each other despite not having any direct synergy. Finding a way to play Dark Magician is incredibly difficult in the sense that there are way too many underlying elements that prevent it from being a functioning strategy at the moment. Although a lot of ideas I will be presenting in this video aren't necessarily new ideas, however, with some refinement, I do think that this version of the deck is very well positioned to be a threat in the metagame. This by any stretch of the imagination won't be the best deck in the format, and this deck isn't expected to do any tops. However, on your day with some luck and with some good piloting abilities, I do think that this deck can win a locals, and I've seen pretty decent success with it at locals. Haven't won anything but a few X1 finishes when I did take this deck to locals, and it has performed surprisingly well given the current landscape of Yu-Gi-Oh! Starting off this deck profile, we are playing the 1 copy of Dark Magician and the 1 copy of Dark Magician Girl. No, this is not a Primite variant, despite the idea that you can play Primite. If you do wish to play Primite, just play 2 Dark Magicians. However, the Dark Magician and the Dark Magician Girl is incredibly viable because of Soul Servant and how powerful that card is within the deck. In this particular list, we are playing 3 copies of Magician's Rod. The reason for this is that we don't want to turn on the K9 cards, and Dark Magician's Rod being a normal summon in the deck and our only normal summon of the deck does make it seem okay to play at 3, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But we follow up the Magician's Rod with 3 copies of Magician's Souls. Magician's Souls is probably the best card in the deck, like it always is in every Dark Magician variant. Yes, I will stand by the fact that this card is better than Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, despite it being against popular demand or popular opinions within the community. And to round off the monster count, we play 2 copies of Illusion of Chaos. Now, 2 copies of Illusion of Chaos is essentially very interesting and also relatively controversial amongst the Dark Magician community. The reason why we are playing 2 copies of Illusion of Chaos is to essentially not turn on the K9 cards. The purpose of this deck is to not really play into K9, as it is now being used as a more so of a hand trap engine rather than an engine, because since the ban list semi-dismantling Vanquished Soul, and because of this we are really limiting the amount of cards we want to activate in our hand. So Magician's Souls does stay at 3 because it's just so good, but cutting down Illusion of Chaos to 2 and Magician's Rod to 3 just for that purpose, it doesn't seem like it's a pretty big difference, but it does come up and it does work. Seeing Magician's Rod feels a little bit better within this list, and there are other reasons for that as well. We round off the Dark Magician spell cards by playing 3 copies of Soul Servant and 1 copies of Secrets of Dark Magic. Apologies for pausing this video abruptly. I do want to insert a shameless plug within the video. If you're interested in buying this The Ultimate Magical Swordsman playmat, you can check out my newly launched website, GameSetMatchy.com. It's a website I just started for essentially all your TCG needs. Currently, we only have playmats, but in the future, we hope to extend to deck boxes and sleeves and accessories like that. For now, the quantity is incredibly limited, as this is just the first essentially test run. There will be more playmats available in the future. However, for the time being, the quantity available is very scarce, and essentially all the profits I make on this website is going directly back into the channel. The idea of this was to help grow the finances of this channel, to give you the best quality and the future viewers the best quality I can possibly produce for you, essentially. All the profits don't go into my pocket. They're going to be reinvested back into the website and into the channel to make sure that you get the content you deserve. So if you are interested in supporting the cause, visit gamesetmatchy.com. This engine will make you roll your eyes, and I promise, let me explain myself, and I'll explain why this engine is a viable strategy within the current metagame right now. Please don't roll your eyes too much and just hear me out. We are playing Runick. We are playing 2 copies of Runick Fountain, your standard Runick count of 3 Runick Tips, 3 Runick Freezing Curses, 3 Flashing Fires, 3 Runick Destructions, and 3 Runick Slumbers. You can play more, however, this is kind of the bare minimum you want. I did want to cut down on the Runick cards just a little bit to give myself a bit more flexibility with other forms of non-engine and alternative sub-engines that I'm using in this deck to really enhance the power level of this deck. And the reason why these Runick cards are so good within Dark Magician was when you pair them with a card like Dragoon or the Dark Magicians themselves, the Dark Magician allowing you to chain block Runick Fountain to draw your cards and to guarantee that you draw into your combo pieces and draw into more interruptions on your opponent's turn feels really, really incredible. Now, why is Runick so good with Dark Magician? Outside of what I just specified with drawing cards and chain blocking with the likes of Dark Magician, or stacking your deck to draw into whatever you need off the back of Soul Servant in combination with Runick Fountain, what these cards do is something a little bit more specifically within the current game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Take a look at the best decks in the game right now. In Draco Tail, you are playing one of both of the trap cards. In Mitsurugi, you are playing 1 to 2 copies of Murakumo and or some of the other more important combo pieces that your opponent wants to search but not necessarily wants to draw. In Yummy, one of Yummy's best win conditions is their field spell. And how many do they play in the best decks? In the best and most recent topping lists, a lot of Yummy players are gravitating towards playing one of each of the field spells. What does this mean? It means that when you go first and you activate a Runick Tip, or you're activating a Runick Slumber, or you're interrupting your opponent throughout their lines of play, they are forced to be banishing cards off the top of their deck. In some of the best versions of Yummy, hitting Obedience School, hitting their 1 copy of Triple Tactics Talents, or one of the field spell, even Hornet Drones, feels really, really incredible. Yes, there are situations where they're going to be able to play through it in some regards. However, eliminating your opponent's win condition is unfortunately the best way for Dark Magician to see success. If your opponent can't get to their win condition, it doesn't matter if their deck is tier 0 and Dark Magician is table 500 deck. If your opponent can't get to their win condition, they're not going to win the game. More so, dealing with a card like Draco Tail Flame in Draco Tail, they can't no longer deal with your Fountain, or dealing with a card like Draco Tail Horn, which is one of their 2 trap cards. In this list, it's incredibly accessible to make a full power Chaos Angel. Without those cards, it's very difficult for Draco Tail to out that full power Chaos Angel because they don't have any in-engine ways to out it. It's pray you open Droplet or bust, and that's kind of the state you want to put your opponent in. Is it Saki? Incredibly. However, we are playing a table 500 deck, and without luck, we're not going to see any success. So the reason why these Runick cards are so good is because you are slowly burning away at your opponent's resources. You are slowly establishing a grind game for yourself, and once you've established yourself in a position where you can now, your opponent loses their constant cycle of resources, the Runick cards should do enough to carry you through the rest of the game. And the Dark Magician cards on top of that, layering it with a card like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon or a Bystial Dispatcher or a Chaos Angel, which I'll get into how we make those cards in later on in the video, that is a pretty substantial and decent enough win condition for Dark Magician to see some success. This is the biggest flaw of the deck, and that's going second. You aren't opening any real significant point of interactions to deal with whatever your opponent's making. So for the most part, your opponent is building a full power board, to which it is going to be relatively difficult to break. However, the beautiful thing about the current game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that there aren't too many Omni Negates floating around in the game. A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is built on layered and multiple point of interaction gameplay. Opening 4 Runick cards with 2 engine pieces like a Magician's Rod or Magician's Souls, or another sub-engine we're playing that I'll show later on in the video, that is a lot of pressure, and that's a decent amount of and a handful amount of interruptions that we have not only on our turn, but multiple points of interaction that we could use to push through our opponent's board while establishing our own. Before getting into the engine that ties this whole deck together, I will be going over the pseudo non-engine cards that we are utilizing. We are going to be playing the 1 copy of Mausoleum of White because we are playing Spirit with Eyes of Blue. This card just dumps Dark Magician to the graveyard, turning on Soul Servant and giving you a little bit extra value from your cards. Even a card like Magician's Souls, sending this card for more draws to potentially draw into Runick cards feels very good. We play the 1 Called by the Grave, pretty generic, stops every hand trap in the game, Molcharmies, Ash, anything like that. On top of this, Called by hitting Mitsurugi is pretty substantial. 1 copy of Triple Tactics Talents. Your opponent interrupts with you in any stretch of the imagination. You talents, rip their hand, or draw 2 more cards, digging deeper into your deck is really strong. And the 1 copy of Terraforming, or the extra copy of Runick Fountain. The engine that ties everything together is one that I've fallen in love with all over again, especially with the introduction of Mitsurugi back into the format. We are playing Bystials. We're playing 3 copies of Bystial Lubellion with 1 copy of Bystial Druiswarm, Bystial Magnamut, and 1 copy of Bystial Regained. Now, these cards are so incredibly accessible simply due to the fact that we are drawing an unbelievable amount of cards every single turn, so you are guaranteed to draw into any of these. If you draw into Bystial Lubellion or you open Bystial Lubellion, having access to Magnamut or Druiswarm feels really incredible. The original thought behind these was to essentially deal and be able to deal with Murakumo through the likes of Bystial Magnamut and Bystial Druiswarm. However, the more I played with this deck and the better I got with it, the more I started using these cards as extenders, using them on my turn to facilitate other plays and to layer my end board rather than holding these as interruptions. Because in the sense of playing against Dracotail, sometimes against Yummy they don't come up, but things like that, these cards aren't really viable outside of playing against the Mitsurugi matchup. So I found myself having to use these cards as extenders in games 2 and 3, and I feel like they are so much better as extenders rather than hand traps and interruptions. And I feel that what they generate for your end board is really, really impressive. Moving on to the extra deck, this is probably the most interesting aspect of the deck in my opinion because of the flexibility it offers. We play 1 copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, the best card in the extra deck in my opinion, which is the Dark Magicians. Just the ability to chain block Fountain is really good. Ending on this, 3 Runick cards in hand and Runick Fountain is very, very good and very oppressive. The beautiful thing about the Dark Magicians is that if you draw into, for example, post side of Forbidden Droplet, or you draw into additional Runick cards with the threat of Runick Fountain being removed from the board, Dark Magicians allowing you to set that Runick card and use it as insurance is very effective and something that's significantly underlooked in my opinion. One of the craziest cards in the extra deck is Magistus Chorizo, the ability to use Magician's Rod and one of the Runick monsters, or Magician's Souls and one of the Runick monsters to get access to a tuner to go into a Bystial Dispatter, for example, using Bystial Magnamut or Druiswarm is very, very awesome. Now for the Runick monsters, we are playing 2 copies of Hugin, 1 copy of Moonin, 1 copy of Gary, and 1 copy of Sleipnir. The spice of the list is we are playing 1 Masked Hero Darklaw. In the side deck, we are playing 3 copies of Mass Change 2, and the reason for this is this card is a blowout when it comes to the current metagame. Going first post side, if you just draw into Mass Change off your Runick cards, or even see it in your opening hand, going something like normal summon Magician's Rod or summoning Gary off the back of any Runick card and then activating Mass Change to dodge any interruptions like an Imperm or a Veiler, or even just going Mass Change at the end of your combo, turning a Dark Monster into Masked Hero Darklaw is really, really good. Why is Masked Hero Darklaw fantastic? Is because it turns off the entire Mitsurugi deck. It turns off all of Yummy, it significantly handicaps Dracotail, and I think Masked Hero Darklaw is kind of the ace in the hole, especially post side for this list. And this is another reason, another card that we are eliminating our opponent's resources. If our opponent wants to play, they have to remove resources from their deck. We are playing the 1 copy of Guardian Chimera, incredibly easily accessible off the back of Secrets of Dark Magic. and just drawing 2, popping 1, or vice versa is just really, really effective, especially into Yummy. Once your opponent starts spamming the board with Yummy, once Guardian Chimera hits the board, dealing with 2 monsters, it is very, very effective. We then play the 1 copy of Chaos Angel. Chaos Angel is pretty incredible in this list, only for the reason that Dark Magician and Hugin, or Magician's Souls and Sleipnir, there are just so many ways to access Chaos Angel, and not only just a Chaos Angel, but a full powered Chaos Angel, which is a pretty decent win condition in its own right. And for that reason alone, Chaos Angel is a pretty incredible card within this list. Just dealing with a card being unaffected in most situation is really strong. We then play the 1 Bystial Dispatter off the back of Chorizo and a Bystial. This card's incredibly accessible, which can then be used into going into Hieratic Seals and being brought back by a card like Branded Regain. So constantly being able to recycle this card is really impressive. Additionally, in those situations where your Dark Magician gets banished or whatever the case is, you can just bring it back. Even post demod, if Dark Magician of Destruction comes out, I think Bystial Dispatter will be a crazy card, because once you banish your Diabellstar, or once you banish your Dark Magician, Bystial Dispatter just being able to bring it back for free is really, really incredible, and opens up a lot of interesting avenues to potentially play the deck. We then play the 1 copy of Spirit with Eyes of Blue, and to round off the extra deck, we play 1 copy of SP Little Knight. The interesting lines this deck can produce is very interesting, and it's something that I think a good pilot with this list will have a lot of fun with. There are a lot of possible combinations. With how consistent this deck is, there are a lot of an infinite amount of possibilities when it comes to constructing an end board. Assuming you open Magician's Souls, let's say one of these 4, we'll say hypothetically Soul Servant, and in this case, I won't say that we open the one-ofs, we'll say we open a Bystial Lubellion with any Runick card, right? And this is a probable hand you'll get, because like I said, you have a bunch of copies to open one of these, ways to open Bystial Lubellion, or drawing into these cards off the back of Runick cards. Like these plays are relatively accessible for the most part. In this hypothetical, we'll send Magician's Souls. We'll send Dark Magician off the back of Magician's Souls. Here we can either send Soul Servant to stack cards. If not, we want to just activate Soul Servant to draw into Magician's Rod, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter in this case. At the end of the day, we can summon Magician's Rod, search the Soul Servant, search the Secrets of Dark Magic. It doesn't really matter in this case. I just want to show you a hypothetical of kind of the direction you want this deck to go into. Here, we will summon a Runick monster off the back of whatever Runick card we open, and in this case, we'll summon Hugin. Here, we can grab Fountain. In this example, we won't, but assuming that you have multiple cards in hand and a way to grab Runick Fountain, this end board just kind of gets pretty incredible. I know this is a mess, and I do apologize for that. However, what we can do now is off the back of Lubellion, or if we open Magnema and or Duraswarm, we can search one or the other. In this hypothetical, we can use Magnema to banish the Dark Magician and summoning Bystial Magnema, activating its effect, or in this case we have Bystial Duraswarm, or in this case we have Lubellion Engrave. It doesn't really matter in this case. Here, what we can do, the really interesting aspect of the deck, is we can fusion summon Hugin and Magician's Rod into Chorizo. Now, the beautiful thing here is we can go Chorizo and Magnema into your Bystial Dispatter, and Dispatter can now revive your Dark Magician from the Banish Zone, bringing it back into rotation. Now, if we had Magician's Rod or Soul Servant in this case to stack Magician's Rod, or vice versa, we could grab Secrets of Dark Magic and put these two into a Dragoon. However, there are more interesting ways to do that. Assuming we have our Secrets of Dark Magic in our hand at this point, or we drew into it for whatever reason, what we can do is we can link off our Magician's Souls into a Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Now, in this hypothetical, I did go straight into Bystial Magnema. However, if we did utilize Bystial Lubellion, we'd have Bystial Lubellion in grave at the moment after it did search us Magnema or Duraswarm. In this case, we will probably remove our Bystial Dispatter from the board, summoning back your Lubellion, and Lubellion will place your Regain, bringing back your Dispatter on your opponent's turn once they summon a monster. We can link those two off into Heraldic Seals as another form of interaction. And now on our opponent's turn, we have secrets off the back of whatever we summon off Heraldic Seals. Dispatter can come back, and the beautiful thing about Dispatter is a lot of the Dispatter's biggest flaw is that sometimes it struggles to get its negates, because how often does your opponent banish their own cards, or you have to banish your opponent's cards? Well, what do Runick cards do? Runick cards give Bystial Dispatter infinite amount of fodder for negates, and that is why Bystial Dispatter is truly remarkable in this list. Off the back of this, Secrets of Dark Magic, if our Heraldic Seals bounces itself to summon a Bystial Druid Swarm, Secrets can fuse Dark Magician and Druid Swarm into a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, or whatever Bystial you summon off the back of Seals, or whatever Dragon you summon off the back of Seals. That is pretty remarkable in its own right. That's kind of the interesting interactions the Bystial cards have with the Dark Magician engine. It does create a very complex game state, however, a very fun one if it's something you wish to challenge yourself with. Something that I mentioned at the start of the video when discussing the Runick cards is how flexible and interchangeable the third engine is. In this hypothetical, we did play Bystials and the Bystial package, which is a total of 6 cards. Additionally, if you want to remove the 3 extra non-engines, these can be also interchanged for any other engine that you see fit. An engine that has seen a lot of play in the past with Dark Magician, for better or for worse amongst the community, is Fiendsmith. And how the smooth transition Fiendsmith has within this list is pretty incredible. And the question you ask yourself is, Matchy, how? Moon of the Closed Heaven is banned. How are you getting to the Fiendsmith engine through Dark Magician? Now you just need Rod, Illusion of Chaos, any combination of Soul Servant in combination with Runick cards, or you can just open one Magician's Rod and any Runick card in the deck. In this case, we play 15. The beautiful thing here is once we go normal summon Rod, if our opponent does interrupt it with anything, we can activate Runick Destruction or any Runick card to summon Moonin. And if you know where this is going, this is a hilarious alternative to get it into Fiendsmith. We can overlay Moonin and Magician's Rod to go into Mellow Melody, which is a light fiend monster. So what we can do is we can then just link off Mellow Melody into Fiendsmith Requiem, turning on the entire Fiendsmith engine without needing to go into Moon. Requiem can go into Engraver, turning on your Fiendsmith cards, and the rest of these cards can be interchanged with the Fiendsmith engine. And the Fiendsmith engine does offer, for better or for worse, other avenues of play that you can experiment within Dark Magician. A lot of these interesting avenues now open up because of what the Runick cards offer within Dark Magician. So having a generic engine that acts as an extender and multiple layers of interruptions and multiple points of interactions and acts as extenders and board breakers is something that is, I think, very underlooked. And I know this is an idea that has been talked about in the past, specifically on my channel. However, it's an idea that I think has been forgotten about, despite it still being very much viable. First and foremost, I want to take this time to thank you so much for watching this video. It means so much to me, like always. And I do want to take the opportunity to show face and essentially apologize for the incredibly long hiatus. It has been one of the most emotional periods of my life. For one, I did get married. I married the love of my life. However, in the same vein, on the other side of the coin, my family did experience a pretty significant tragedy, and that's probably as far as I'll go into detail about that. So throughout this roller coaster wave of emotions, I do want to thank you so much for the endless support you have shown me, the constant flood of comments, positive comments, asking for follow-up videos, for future videos, suggestions, even going back to videos from years ago. I'm still getting comments and positive feedback from. So I do want to take this time to thank you so much for the support. And going forward, I'm hoping to get back into a routine, and you'll see more from me in the future. So thank you so much, and I appreciate the love.